Amen. So yesterday we looked at the second temple, and we saw that it was confirming, reiterating, and giving a second witness to many of the points that were made in our initial study on the first temple. We see that, as the first temple was finished in the history of Solomon, Darius passed the second decree, which is a symbol of the second angel's message. And it's within the history of the second decree, it's in the history of Darius that the construction of the temple was finished. In that time period, God raised up prophets and he raised up a reformer, specifically Zerubbabel, which means out of Babylon. Right? And Zerubbabel is a symbol of the second angel. And Zerubbabel, we read in Zechariah that God told Zerubbabel, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this temple, and the hands of Zerubbabel shall finish it. So we have the prospect of a work of organization that has been taking place at least since 9/11, and this work will be accomplished before the crisis at midnight. And it must be accomplished before the crisis at midnight because at midnight, if you think of the dynamics of what we understand is going to take place, it'll be too late to organize then. You don't prepare for a crisis within the crisis, right? You prepare for a crisis prior to. So it is now in the time of peace, God is organizing his movement that when the crisis comes at midnight, will spring into action to do a certain work, and that's the work, as we've been saying, of calling out the Levites. And it must be a practical work because these Levites, they're Seventh-day Adventists. They are people who, when the call is given, they will need places to. They'll need places to fellowship. They'll need places where they can be taught the truth, right? They'll need places. They will need schools of the prophets. They will need that structure and those protections that are provided by gospel order, and all that can't be put in place at midnight within the context of a crisis. It must be done before. So it's significant that God is repeating this truth. The temple is finished. The temple is finished. It's constructed and finished prior to the decree at midnight. Okay, so what I'd like us to look at today, or this morning, we've said there's a foundation that is laid at 9/11 in the history of the second angel. And we're identifying 2014 as a waymark. But we also have the prediction before midnight. This comes prior to midnight. So what is the relationship between 2014 and the prediction before midnight? How do we understand these two waymarks? I can say a number of things, and we can lay out a few lines as we do this. God has opened to us a number of lines that tell us, well, firstly, He opened up to us that there is this development, a waymark, that comes before midnight, called the prediction before midnight. I've spoken of the history of Samuel Snow, which demonstrates that before midnight, in his time period, which was on July 21st, he put in place he put on the record through a publication an increase of knowledge on the close of the prophetic periods. And this publication was dated May 2nd. So as we came to look at the history of the development of the Midnight Cry message more closely, we came to see that what we should expect before midnight is the message that is proclaimed at midnight. The Midnight Cry message is actually formalized before we arrive at this waymark. At this waymark that is midnight. And midnight for the priests is the shut door. And so there's a study, The Seven Thunders of Samuel Snow, through which this can be established. But other lines have been opened up which clarify what we understand takes place at this waymark. There's the Seven Thunders of the seven Persian kings, which we won't go through, the Seven Thunders of the Roman Caesars. All these are lines of the Seven Thunders, which are identifying this waymark that comes before midnight and are teaching us about what takes place at this waymark. That's the prediction before midnight. So we'll lay out some thoughts because we understand a number of things take place at the prediction before midnight. We have on one level the formalization of a message. There's a message that is put in place at this waymark. A prediction is put in place there. And a line that we've looked at to establish this point is the 30 years of Christ. Christ was born rather, in 4 BC, which we've said is 9/11, right? And in AD 27, he comes out of this period of hiding when he's anointed the Messiah. And we mark this at midnight, the Mari vision, when Christ appears before his people. And what did we say? We saw that 6 months before, or half a year before, 0.5 of a year before. John the Baptist is raised up, and what is he doing? There is a message that he's giving, that he puts in place, based on the prophecies of the book of Daniel. And this message is fundamentally a prediction about the close of probation. So we know that there's a prediction put in place here. But we can lay out another line, also hinged upon the number 30. And this is the 30 years of Abraham's covenant. It might be useful to go through the history, because this one is. I don't think it's as familiar. Turn to Genesis 12, verses 1 to 4. Genesis 12, verses 1 to 4. We're looking at the history of Abraham's covenant. How God entered into covenant with Abraham. Just by way of summary, this is it's quite a significant and substantial study, but we'll only highlight a few points. So verse 1 it says, Now the Lord had said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I'll bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and be blessed. So Abraham departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him. And Lot went with him, and Abraham was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. So here Abraham is 75 years old when he receives the covenant promise, and he departs out of Haran. He is leaving the land of the Chaldeans. So there's a departure out of the land of his birth, typifying out of the land. Where did Abraham leave first? Haran was the second point, right? Ur of the Chaldees. So he's leaving Ur of the Chaldees, and then he tarries in Haran for a period of time, and the covenant promise is given to him, and then he departs from Haran. So I'm saying Abraham's departure from Ur of the Chaldees in Haran is typifying the call to come, the call to separate that is spoken of in connection with the second angel, which for our history comes at 9/11. And of course, Abraham receives a covenant promise that he would have a son. So let's turn to Genesis 15, verses 1 to 6. While you turn to Genesis 15, Abraham departed from Haran after what happened? Abraham departed he left Haran after his father died. So he initially leaves from Ur of the Chaldees, and then he left with his father. But if you hold that chapter and turn to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 11 rather, verse 31. Genesis chapter 11 verse 31 to 32. It says, And Terah took Abraham his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abraham's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So you have Terah, who's Abraham's father. So by virtue of his being his father, what does he represent? He represents your father is your head, right? Is your leader. So Terah dies in Haran, and Genesis 12 tells us that now Abraham, he's receiving the covenant promise and leaving Haran. And what was Terah? What was Terah a worshipper of the true God?
No.
Where do you find that? Where's that verse which identifies that? Sorry? Joshua, yes?
24 verse 2.
I just found it. Joshua 24 verse 2 says, "And Joshua said unto all the people, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods." So Joshua 24 verse 2 tells us Terah, he served other gods. So he's a symbol of the leadership of Adventism, right? That dies at 9/11. After having gained an experience, after an idolatrous experience, right? They're serving other gods. They come to 9/11 where they die, and we have many witnesses for the death of leadership at 9/11, from Saul and others, right? So Terah dies, Abraham's 75 years old, and he leaves Ur. So this is typifying the second angel at 9/11. So if we continue with this narrative, Genesis 15. Verses 1 to 6 says, "And after these things the word of the Lord came unto Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abraham, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abraham said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad, and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto them, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur the Chaldees, to give thee this land to inherit it. So we see that in connection with the covenant promise is the promise that Abraham would have a son. The covenant promise is fulfilled on a level when God gives Abraham a son. So we know that Ishmael was born before Isaac. Ishmael is born before Isaac. Let's just put a text to that. Genesis 16. verse 15 says, And Hagar bare Abraham a son, and Abraham called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. And Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abraham. So how old was Abraham when Ishmael was born? He was 86 years old. So this was before the birth of Isaac, because we're going to see that Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. If we turn to Genesis 21. Genesis 21 verses 1 to 5. It says, And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the said time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 years old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So Abraham leaves Ur of the Haran when he's 75 years old. So there's this period of 25 years. 25 years later, Isaac is born. When Abraham is 100 years. Now, there's a development that takes place 5 years later, and that is the weaning of Isaac. We can establish this as having been 5 years later through the comment section of Patriarchs and Prophets, page 759. Now you don't have it, but I'll just read portions of it. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 759. Now it tells us that the statement in Exodus 12 verse 40, Patriarchs and Prophets 759. The statement in Exodus 12 verse 40 that the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years gives the impression that the Israelites from Jacob's entry into Egypt to the Exodus actually spent 430 years in the country of the Nile. That this impression cannot be correct is obvious from Paul's inspired interpretation presented in Galatians 3 verses 16 and 17, where the 430 years are said to cover the period beginning when God made his covenant with Abraham until the law was promulgated in Sinai. Paul seems to refer to the first promise made by God to Abraham when he was called to leave Haran in Genesis 12. At that time, the 430 years began when Abraham was 75 years old, while the prophecy of Genesis 15 verse 13 began 30 years later when Abraham was 105 and his son Isaac 5 years old. At that time, Ishmael, who was born after the flesh, persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, beginning the time of affliction of Abraham's seed, which intermittently would be continued until the time of the Exodus. So there's a lot there, there's a lot in this passage, that's worth looking at, lining up the 430 years and the 400-year prophecies as they relate to this line that we are speaking of. But the point I want us to zone in on is that this passage is identifying that Isaac was weaned when Abraham was 105 years old. 105 years. So we have another 30 years, right? The number 30 is a symbol of this time period from 9/11 to midnight, with the prediction before midnight. And there's a gap of And there's a division of 25 and 5 that we see being brought to view. In this slide, it's not 25 and 5 per se, but you do see the number 5 here in the identification of the time period from prediction before midnight to midnight as half a year. And here you have 5 years. So what takes place before we start looking at what this represents as the prediction before, what this says about what happens at the prediction before midnight? Isaac being weaned. Weaning is when a child ceases to subsist on their mother's milk. I think there's greater cultural significance to the weaning here. It's not simply, I don't think anyway, when a child moves from mother's milk to solid food. There's more to it, but weaning was essentially a coming of age, a coming to maturity, so to speak. So here Isaac is weaned. He's representing a class that has come to full maturity, right? He's representing a class that's come to full maturity, and him being the seed of him being the child of promise, because there's Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael, who Paul tells us one was the child of the bondwoman, and the other was the child of the covenant. So Isaac represents those, the wise priests, who are the children of the covenant. They enter into this covenant with the Lord, and he comes to maturity. And what happens at the weaning of Isaac? What happens at the weaning of Isaac? Because Ishmael was already there, wasn't he? Ishmael was already there. And Ishmael, as the firstborn, should have been the heir of the promises, shouldn't he? And you can read in Patriarchs and Prophets how the birth of Isaac created, what did it create with Ishmael and his mother? Hatred and jealousy. But there comes a point when Ishmael starts to actively persecute, right? He starts to mock Isaac. And we find this in Genesis 21, verses 8 to 12. Genesis 21, verses 8 to 12. It says, "And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous to Abraham in Abraham's sight, because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called." So, what do you see here at midnight? You have the seed of the bondwoman, the tares, the foolish virgins, right? Now, actively, what are they doing? They're persecuting the seed of the seed of promise. So we mark the beginning of persecution at midnight, and it's the foolish priests, like Judas, that are going to be at the forefront of persecuting God's faithful people during this crisis. Right? It's those who are formerly our brethren, even within this movement, who are going to be at the forefront of fulfilling this work. So this is at midnight, and of course Ishmael is cast out. Right? He's lost. He's lost for eternity. He identify that those who do this work, they're not party to this covenant, and they're lost. But now, when we bring this back here to Isaac's birth, when he was 100 years, you see, Ishmael was born before, when Abraham was 86 years old. So, to all intents and purposes, Ishmael was the seed of promise, wasn't he? He was the only one. He was the firstborn. So there were no questions about it. He was the heir of the promises and the inheritance that goes from the father to the son, wasn't he? But what do you see once Isaac is born? You see two classes, don't you? Right? Now there are two classes. Now there's a distinction. You see that, there's Isaac and Ishmael, right? And one is the by virtue of being the child of Abraham's wife, he is the heir according to God's promise. Ishmael is also a son, but he represents another class. So when we look here, we see two classes being identified. So here we have a prediction being put in place, and we see two classes. I'll lay down another line of thought. When we look at the Last Supper, which we've already spoken about, Christ is seized and bound at midnight, marking the binding of the priest. But at the Last Supper, which we've already shown typifies the prediction before midnight, when Christ is washing the disciples' feet, when you look at the symbolism of all those interactions, it's identifying the increase of knowledge that takes place on the events that follow at midnight. So Christ is here making a prediction, as we've already identified here. But you have Judas. And Christ makes a final plea to Judas. But what does Judas do? He what? Well, Christ is calling on Judas to surrender his heart. Right? And Judas, he refuses to do so. He hardens his heart. And he leaves. What do we call that? When God is telling you to do something and you say, I'm not going to do it.
Rebellion.
Right, so there's a rebellion. So we mark that when we come to the prediction before midnight, we're going to see a rebellion taking place and a falling away. Within the ranks of the people that God is entering into covenant with, within the ranks of the priests, there's a rebellion and a falling away. So the challenge, at least in how I came to understand it, is the point we're seeking to clarify is what is the relationship between 2014 and the prediction before midnight. So you have all these lines and others, many others, which are telling us the developments that are going to take place at this waymark. But now when we look at what we've listed so far, we have a prediction being put in place at the prediction before midnight. In 2014, do you have a prediction being put in place? Do we? No? Yes? What was it? What was it based on? Ezra 7:9. Ezra 7:9 is the prediction that is being put in place that there is a repetition of the midnight cry before the Sunday goes, right? And everything else that followed is just a further elaboration of this point. There are going to be two classes identified within the movement, because up until 2014, it was just one movement. We're all on the same page. We thought or we believed, right? Prediction before midnight, we know that you're going to see two classes within the movement. Two classes are going to become visible. Identifying this as in the future. But what do we see in 2014? We see two classes, don't we? We see various doctrinal subjects that were that became the point of controversy even within our ranks. Like the Day of the Lord, Joel, the methodology. How much weight do we place on the methodology of line upon line versus a plain devotional reading of the text of Scripture? Right, controversy over and other subjects, and we see two classes being identified based on the reception or rejection of these things. And what else do we see? We see also a rebellion, a rejection of foundational and established truths by those in positions of authority at the time. But the prediction before midnight, what do we see? We see a rebellion, don't we? Right? A rebellion is marked. So you have a challenge where this way, Mark, I understood it to be in the future. It was understood to be in the future. But as you look at the various developments that take place there, you see that these things happened in 2014. Right? But at the same time, there are things that happened at the prediction before midnight that haven't happened yet. One example, we'll take another illustration of 30 years. And this is the 30 years of Justinian's decree. Given that this is history versus just Bible verses that we can turn to together, I'll just narrate it. The daily is taken away in 508.
Yes.
And the taking away of the daily is 9/11. Because with the taking away of the daily, what you have with the removal of paganism in order to make way for the ascendancy of the papacy, what you have is a fundamental change in the character of the government at the time, right? And in 9/11, you can identify a fundamental change in the character of the government at the time. And this is, we use the language in this movement, where you see with the passing of the Patriot Act in the United States, you see the United States moving from English law to Roman law. And it's being stated, maybe overly simplistically, but in order to convey the point, to convey a point that English law is, how would you characterize English law in a sentence? Innocent until proven guilty. Roman law is guilty until proven innocent. Right? It's more nuanced than that, but that's a simplification on that serves our purposes, I guess. It's enough to convey the point that we need to understand. So, what we have is a fundamental change in the character of the government. I'm saying that's typifying that's the taking away of the daily 508 is typifying 9/11. And what you have 25 years later, in 533, is Justinian's decree. But this is the introduction. Justinian introduces his decree. And his decree went into effect in 538. Why did Justinian pass his decree? Why did he introduce his decree? Well, firstly, what was his decree? Right? He introduced a decree declaring the Pope to be the corrector of heretics, right? Giving the Pope power to use the apparatus of the state to punish those that encountered religious heretics, to punish divergent religious elements, right, within the empire. Right? It was given the authority to identify who was a subversive and dangerous religious element, and to punish them using the instrumentalities of the state. Right? What led him to introduce his decree? There was a radical religious element with the kingdom. And what was that? The Arians. Right? He introduced, because Justinian was a Catholic. Justinian was a Catholic, and he wanted to get rid of the Arians that were within the realm of Rome. The Arians you can show. We don't have time to do that, but you can show as a symbol of Islam. The Arians you can show typify Islam. So what does this say? It's typifying that there's a decree that's going to be introduced, giving the religious element of the state power to identify radical religious movements and for them to be punished through the instrumentality of the state. But what will motivate Justinian or the government of the United States to introduce this decree is something Islam will be doing. Radical Islam is going to be the motivation for the introduction of this decree. Just as radical Islam was the motivation for the passing of the Patriot Act. We have the same development here. But the decree, although introduced in 533, didn't go into effect until 538. And 538 is marking the beginning of the 1,260 years persecution. Right, so 538 is midnight, the beginning of persecution. And we have the structure of 30, 25, and 5 that we've seen in the other two lines. So what is this telling us about what's going to happen at the prediction before midnight? There's some sort of decree that's introduced. And this decree, by its very nature, its character, is going to be a violation of the principles of church and state. And it will give the apostate Protestant element some sort of power to identify and address those that it considers radical or divergent religious elements, right? And to penalize them through the instrumentalities of the and these people will be penalized through the instrumentalities of the state, the various means that the state has to punish dissenters. Right? So this decree is introduced here, but it is passed here. Right? And there are even thoughts as to how that would take place, because, for example, how old do you have to be a congressman in the United States? How old do you have to be a congressman? In order to be a congressman in the United States, the minimum age is 25 years old. How old do you have to be a senator in the United States? 30 years old. So this suggests that this decree would go through Congress first, and then into the Senate. 25 then? 30. Right? So this decree has not been introduced yet. When it comes, you will see it. You will see it, but there hasn't been any legislation put forth that meets these characteristics. So we know that this development, the development that is set forth in this line, Justinian's decree, this is a future development. So we have elements of things that we see at the prediction before midnight that are yet future. And we have elements of it that began as far back, we can identify as far back as 2014. So how do we understand the relationship of these two waymarks? How do you reconcile these developments? We know that you can view a waymark as a point in time, or as a period of time. Just as we used to view the waymark of the midnight cry as a point in time, but God also showed us that you can zoom in and pass out the developments and the progression of events in that history and identify it as a period of time from midnight to the midnight cry. So 2014 to PBM, that this is a period of time. And we can say we're in the history of the prediction before midnight. We're in the history of the prediction before midnight. This progressive development leading to we're in the history of a progressive development leading to a full establishment, a full manifestation of all the things that we see that God's word tells us are going to take place under this waymark. Is that established for us elsewhere? So this is the last point as we close off. We need to understand the nature of how God's word communicates prophetic truth. For example, let's look at Revelation chapter 14. Verse 8. So this is the second angel. And it says, "And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because you have made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of." So we have this development, we have the second angel. And what is being described in this verse? All nations have drank of the wine of Babylon's fornication. This verse is describing a worldwide development, is it not? Okay. So when did the second angel arrive? No. The second angel. I'm speaking generally, not in our line. Just when did the second angel arrive in the history of the world? April 19, 1844, in Millerite history, right?
Yes.
And what took place here? The Protestant churches, it was identified that the Protestant churches had fully rejected the message of the first angel, right? But if you read the verse, because if you want to be careful, and we should be careful in our reading of the scriptures, because Miller's rules say every word should have its bearing on the subject under consideration, right? It says, all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of fornication. Revelation 14:8 is describing a worldwide development. April 19, was this a worldwide development? No, it wasn't. It was local to the United States, right? So how do we reconcile that? Right, yes. Spirit of prophecy tells us, if you look at page 21 of your notes, the top of page 21, it says, the second angel's message of Revelation 14 was first preached in the summer of 1844, and it then had a more direct application to the churches of the United States, where the warning of the judgment had been most widely proclaimed and most generally rejected, and where the declension in the churches had been most rapid. But the message of the second angel did not reach its complete fulfillment in 1844. The churches then experienced a moral fall in consequence of their refusal of the light of the Advent message. But that fall was not complete. As they have continued to reject the special truths for this time, they have fallen lower and lower. Not yet, however, can it be said that Babylon is fallen because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. She has not yet made all nations to do this. The spirit of world conforming and indifference to the testing truths of our time exists and has been gaining ground in churches of the Protestant faith in all the countries of Christendom. And these churches are included in the solemn and terrible denunciation of the second angel. But the work of apostasy has not yet reached its culmination. The Bible declares that before the coming of the Lord, Satan will work with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness, and they that receive not the love of the truth that they might be saved, will be left to receive strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Not until this condition shall be reached and the union of the church with the world shall be fully accomplished, God Christendom, will the fall of Babylon be complete. The change is a progressive one, and the perfect fulfillment of Revelation 14:8 is yet future. So, what she's identifying is this principle of progression. The second angel arrived on April 19, 1844. But she says there's a progressive development of this principle, right? Leading up to the point when, and this is post-Sunday law, right? We could say Daniel 11 verses 42 and 43. This is, I'll say Sunday law here, but it's post-Sunday law, when the deception has become universal, and the union of church with the world has become fully complete on a worldwide scale. Right. So what is Revelation 14:8 giving us? Revelation 14:8 is giving us it's giving us a snapshot. It's giving us a snapshot of a final development. Is it not?
Yes.
Right? But it's up to the student of prophecy to identify the progressive development of this principle. Right? So and as has been laid out through the operations of agriculture, you have the seed. You have the seeds, right? And these seeds, are they perfect? Are the seeds perfect? They're perfect at their stage of growth, aren't they? And then this seed, it develops. Right? It develops progressively. until you have the full manifestation of that principle. And so if you incorporate that concept that we're given through the operations of agriculture, which illustrates the everlasting gospel and how God works and how He communicates truth, the scripture of the passage of the text often gives you the snapshot, the final development. But we are to trace the progression leading up to this final development. So the second angel, in a sense, it was perfectly fulfilled. In a sense, it was perfectly fulfilled on April 19, 1844, right? Because the seed is perfect. The seed is perfect. It grows up into the full plant, but it is perfect at every stage. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right. So you have the second angel arriving here in April 19, and it is developing progressively towards what we read in Revelation 14 verse 8, which is post-Sunday. How does that, and we see the same thing with the fourth angel. If you read Revelation chapter 18, it's also identifying a worldwide development. This angel arrives at 9/11, and we see the same principle of progression leading you to these post-Sunday Lord developments. So when we read truth, we're to read, it's our responsibility as students of prophecy to understand this, that to incorporate, to apply this principle of progression, because what you're in danger of doing is, if you just read Revelation 14:8, as it reads, you would be liable to do what many do in Adventism, which is to say, well, this hasn't happened, right? And then you look to some future point to identify when these things take place, which will lead you down the wrong path. But so how does this affect how we understand the relationship of these two waymarks, 2014 to prediction before midnight? There's a progressive development towards the full manifestation of all the things that other lines have taught us take place at the prediction before midnight. So we have this development. Just as we've seen and illustrated here. And this has really solemn implications for us that we'll unpack in our next study when we come back. But I think for now, we have enough ground. Let's go to prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the morning manna. Lord, we ask that you may set the seal of your approval upon that which has been shared. May your Spirit bring it home to our hearts. Help us to reflect on these things. Lord, help us to understand them. And Lord, as we have partaken of our spiritual food, we ask for your blessing as we break now to partake of some physical food. We thank you for all your blessings. In Jesus' name we pray.